the band went through the 30s, there were hard times. Into the 40s, tough too. At that time, in the 40s, early 40s, in 1940, there was a special event. It was the 20th anniversary of the death of our founder, Thomas MacCurtan. It was held in Blackpool. The Cork Volunteers Pipe Band were there. As well as that, the Fianna Pipe Band were there. Now, the Fianna Band in later times fizzled out, but it supplied a lot of pipers into the Cork Volunteer Pipe Band. But again, we're talking the 1940s. The internment camp below in the Curragh was opened up. Many people connected with the band found their way in there. In fact, they took people who were in the young lads in the Fianna Band in there as well. You know, in a sense, it was almost like what happened in the north when they had a big scoop for internment. They pulled in people from all around the place. Sure, as I told you earlier, it's well known, there were people in our band who weren't in the army at all. There were people in the Fianna who were young and they didn't even, they weren't in the IRA, like, you know. But they were all scooped in. Some of them signed out because they weren't in the IRA or anything like that. It took the police a bit of time. But around 1940 as well, I mentioned this, like, in particular, there was an event occurred in Cork. Some of the IRA sought to take out prisoners out of Cork jail, and they began to dig from the outside in. I believe some on the other side were digging the other way out. But they came to the notice of the police, or rather they originally came to the notice of some people who told the police. But the police were there hours before the event occurred that brought a lot of anger to Republicans. They, with machine guns and what have you, they went at some of the lads coming out of the tunnel. There was 4 or 5 of them there, I think. None of them were armed. What would you be bringing an arms down in the tunnel for? They'd definitely be in your way, but they didn't have that at all. They were just trying to get the other lads out. But the police opened fire. A lot of people would say, with a lot of good sense, all they had to do was to surround the place and cover the whole thing in. No, they were gun mad. They shot and they killed John Joe Kavanagh and they injured some others. I'm saying that now because I'll later be mentioning other things that relate to it. But the 40s were lean years for the band, but the band kept going. There are photographs there of the band in 48 there, out of the plot. The band always, historically, went out to the Republican plot. As well as that, there were other things we used to do. We used to, since they were started, since the band was started, it went out to the Manchester Martyrs Parade. That went all over the city, up Washington Street, down the South Main Street, North Main Street, over into the Quays, across Patrick's Bridge, up the centre of the town and up to the National Monument. It was attended by Republicans of all levels of the movement, and it was also led at all times by the band, but followed closely behind by what we used to refer to in those days as the city fathers. That would be the Lord Mayor or people like that. The commemoration for MacCurtan, that was held in 1940. The Lord Mayor at the time was Jim Hickey. He was a Labour Lord Mayor, and in later years, in the 60s, I remember Sean McCarthy. He was a great GAA man, but he was a Fianna Fáiler. But they used to march behind our band in commemoration of the men who, the Fenians that were killed, Alan Larkin and O'Brien. So we were well respected in the city. The band was always, like, you know. And we come up then to a period in the 50s where the movement was beginning to pull itself together, and there was a big march held above in Dublin, and it was attended by the Cork unit. There was about 120 Cork fellas in them, went up to Dublin. And there was the band were there as well. There's a photograph of that there. I think it's in number 1 of these pamphlets that done these things. It was, in a sense, the reinvigorating of the Republican movement. Things were beginning to happen. Things had begun to happen in the north. Barracks and territorial premises were beginning to be raided for arms by the Republicans. Particularly in the Derry area, there were two. They were very into it. A fellow called Manus Canning was involved in. Then there was other things over in England as the years went on. Cathy Goulding was involved. Sean McStephane. John Stevenson, as the English would have recorded him as. He was born in England, I understand, but he was a great follower of the Irish Republican movement. But he was arrested anyway over there. And we in the band were at that time probably about 50-50. Half of the band were what you might say civilians. The other half were IRA volunteers. And we were all into training and meant to have a go up north. When it came about in 56, there were 18 men went over the border that night from Cork. Four of them were members of the band. Jimmy Linehan, Seamus O'Linehan, he's known as. He was one of the people that went up. Brendan O'Neill went up as well. Troy was there as well, as a member of the band. Yeah, there was a good turnout there from the band. We were big into it, and the fourth man, by the way, was Mick Murphy, and Mick was the pipe major of the band. He was in North Fermanagh, I think. Brendan and I were in West Tyrone, and Jimmy Lynn was in North Antrim. Jimmy was Cork, for a few other Cork fellas, and he ended up with 7. He served 7 years in Belfast prison.
There's a great picture of him as a piper, isn't there? Lennon.
Oh yeah, he done a. It's not a book that you can buy, but he done one on the Facebook, is it? Or
You can read it online on his blog.
you can read it online. Yeah, yeah, I did read that. Yeah, it was interesting, very interesting. No, that was the kind of the way that the makeup of the band in those years. It was very much an IRA band. It was an IRA band, you know. But as time went on, then we towards the end of the IRA campaign. By the way, the campaign, it didn't mean much to Cork. From about 1957 on to about 1961, around that period, for 4 to 5 years, they pulled out of supplying volunteers for active service. And I was one of the people, Brendan O'Neill, another band member, he got his back up about it too. And we resigned out of the movement, and we became one of those things referred to as a dissident. We went up on our own, and yeah, weren't able to do a whole lot. Like, things were petering out anyway about that time. Like,
but I see the band was still active, because I see.
Well, the band was there all the time.
And they had the Sean South funeral, am I right?
Oh yeah, I wasn't at that because I was up in I was up in the mountains. Yeah. I was up in the Sperrin Mountains. But some other members of the band. Mick Murphy was back actually, and Mick was the pipe major on the day. But since I'd done the series, you know, I did say to people that if anything further came up, I'd come back to them sometime later in the year, which I will, if I get some more photographs. But a friend of mine in Des Long, down in Limerick, got hold of it. I asked him there, and I said, "You're the man to get it," and by gosh, he did. He got it within a few days. He had a copy of it. He supplied me with a copy of the band at Sean South's funeral. Now, I have a photograph of drummers and a bugler from the band playing at Sean South's funeral. Mm-hmm. But what I'm going to tell you now is the fact that that band, I have the photograph now which took place, and I'll put it up later in the year, but it was the band that never played. There was an objection to the band playing by the church below in Limerick. They wouldn't have a band playing. Oh God, when I heard about it later, shades of McSweeney, and he lying dead in England, and our band then not being allowed to play. They wouldn't allow him to play at the church. And the band would have ignored it and gone on with it, like. But what I was told was that Sean South's mother, who was, like a lot of people of her generation, was very religious, and she wanted the clergy to be there. So the band was there, mute throughout the whole ceremony, never played a tune.
There's another photograph though of that period. I think it's 1958. You're in it. And I think it's at McManus's funeral.
Oh yeah.
Up on the border.
Yeah, I played.
I think O'Connell, Daithí O'Connell's brother, is the other person in the photograph.
Yeah, Owen.
Yeah.
He was Dave's brother.
So the band was active.
He and I, the band was there for years afterwards, but he and I went up by car to the County Cavan area up near to the border for McManus's funeral, you know.
And he was shot by the RUC, wasn't he, on the border?
It was Crossan that was shot on the border.
Oh,
McManus was killed in an explosion.
Oh, that's right, died in action, sorry.
James
right.
Crossan was killed, he was waylaid by the RUC.
Right, yeah.
And of course the crowd down here done nothing about it, like they just marked it as raid, and that was it, like another Republican all the way. But we went up and played, I played the pipes, but the crowd in Limerick anyway wouldn't have the pipes. And you know something? In later years, that man in America,
Wickham?
No, this other man in America, Father Sean McManus.
Oh, that's right, the brother of...
The brother
yes, right.
of Patrick McManus.
Yes.
He wrote a little book, and he makes mention that he did remember, of all things, he said he remembered the piper, the lone piper, playing at his brother's funeral, and he was entranced by it. And any time he saw pipers afterwards, he used to always kind of think back to that. As you say, I don't think he was a priest that time, but like he was a man of the cloth, but he saw nothing wrong with the idea of a band or a piper playing at a funeral. So there's nothing nicer than a piper playing a lament or the Dead March and things like that. But the bloody crowd down in Limerick, the clergy wouldn't have it. Jesus, nowadays they have dance bands almost up in the altar. I mean, that's true. How times have changed, and what we had to put up with back in those times. It's amazing. And the band, no, the band went on for years. But I will say this much, like, Desmond Swanton was killed in 1963 in an explosion. Now, I have dealt with that elsewhere. You will remember there the YouTube that I'd done, you know, just if anyone wants to look it up. It's Jim Lane, Socialist Republican.
Part 2.
Part 2. And they'll get a lot of it in. I don't want to be repeating it here too much, like. Only to say, you know, that when I started this thing last year here, getting it going, one of the lads I was talking to, who was a drummer, he used to play now next to Desi Swanton. He said to me, God, they were terrible times when you think of it. Do you know, he says, Desi said to me about 2 days, he says, before he died, that if only the movement, he said, had organised a demonstration at the time at the plot, it wouldn't. He said that would have satisfied him. There are queer things. But that man you mentioned there earlier, Seamus O'Linacon, his book is called A Rebel
Spirit.
A Rebel Spirit.
Yeah.
And anybody that chases it up through, is it YouTube or
Facebook.
Facebook?
Yeah,
They'll get it, like.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But he brought to my attention as well that this, which he done some years back, that he was only out of prison from Belfast a week or something, and that the night before Patrick's Day, on the day of 1963, when Des Swanton, a drummer in our band, was killed, that he was present at a welcome home party in the Thomas Ashe Hall, where the band was stationed. And you know, he said, Daithí O'Connell's sister, who was the girlfriend of Des Swanton, came over to Jimmy and says, do you know, she says, she was crying. She says, Des, she says, is doing something tonight and I'm afraid for him, that something could go wrong. Could you do something? And Jimmy was saying that the big boys in the movement were present in the room, and he said he would, and he approached them, and one of them told him he was too busy. He had brought his wife to the party and he wanted to go downstairs and have a dance. Well, Jesus, it annoyed Jimmy. Very annoyed, he says. And he put Palmer to a point of view. And I know Jimmy like well, and I know the way they think, and they all, the people thought. He said, if they were the army of the Republic and somebody was going to do something that they didn't approve of, what they should have done was go down and detain him and hold him for 24 hours until Dev was gone out of town, and there wouldn't have been any problem. But he says they were too busy. They wanted to go dancing. So, you know, it is pathetic when you think back on it, you know. It was pathetic. So, when that was over, I was OC of the band, by the way. That was an anachronism in itself. I came back from England in '61. Desi Swanton was gone up north by that time. By the way, Desi was arrested on the border, and he was put in prison with several others from down around East Cork and North Cork. You know that fella, Joe Sherlock there was put in prison.
Who ended up in the Labour Party.
Oh yeah, he did. He ended up in the Labour Party. Yeah. But sure, look, there's an awful lot more of them had a go to try and end up in either in the Labour Party or in the Leinster House, where have you, but that, we leave that. But, you know, they were arrested anyway, and he was out and all the rest of it. And what annoyed a lot of people that time too in the city was 1940, 1963, 23 years. That's not a long time. Most of the family, the brothers, sisters of John Joe Kavanagh were still alive. And do you know something? There's where they were putting the monument we say around here, and Devil Air on the podium. And just a few feet away, just a few feet, was where John Joe Kavanagh was buried. And people got annoyed about it. And then the stories were coming up, well, truthful, that's as they were, about how Dev's counterpart, as they'd see him, Michael Collins, just before around after the treaty was signed, but before his death, he came to Cork with Sean McCurtan and others, and he went out to the plot. The Republicans knew about it, and there was about 30 of them surrounded the plot, all armed, and told the party that came out of Free Staters that they'd shoot him dead if they went any further. And Collins had the good sense, and McCurtan, to turn on their heels and walk back to town. And that was in the part of the folklore and what have you, like of the movement at the time. Why the fuck should they be allowing a Devil Air, or at least make a protest about it? But it wasn't made. And as I was going on to say there earlier, this lad who I was talking to, friend of Desi's from Blackrock as well, he says to me, do you know, he says, 2 days before he went out and had himself killed, he had told me that a protest would have sufficed, but to do nothing wasn't acceptable. You know? It's amazing how people's memories go back. I didn't know that, like, you know, I didn't know that. But it was all just silly, like. But the way that they behaved at the time was ridiculous, just ridiculous. They locked the door of the band. I got involved in organising a burial. People came from afar, people who had been in prison with Desi Swanton. They formed a guard of honour, coming out of the church. All these things happened. Hundreds of Corkonians attended, piles of members of the movement, having been told that they shouldn't attend it. 4 members of Cumann went to it. They had a berry on and a little green tie. They just ordinary clothes, kind of thing, like in dark clothes, I suppose. They were taken aside and they were dismissed. I was dismissed. Jesus, they even went as far as to take back from me membership, honorary membership, the Fianna. They used to run an honorary thing, and no, the people who gave it the money annually just to support the lads, the young fellas. They bloody well threw that back to me as well. It was silly, like. It was just silly. But I went to England, came back from England, and I joined up again the band. I was approached actually by Sean MacCurtan to rejoin the movement, and he brought me back in. He told me I'd be OC of the band. That was a position within the band. The pipe major is in charge, but the OC would have to do with any political matters that might arise when you're on a march or where you're out. Like, I was given that job. An anachronism is in the sense that Stevenson told me that you can come back into Sinn Féin, you can come back into the into the band, but he says the army is a different thing. He says that'll take me a bit of time to get people on the right side. Some of them were a bit annoyed that we had left some of us, and I don't know. So that when that occurred, like, I wasn't in the IRA at the time, when Swanton's affair occurred. That was that, like. But the band went on then for years afterwards, and then there was the big split in the 1970s. And the band always had a room below in the Thomas Ashe Hall, and those that were there stayed there. They did go on road marches or whatever you call it. They led parades for the official IRA, as they call themselves at the time, and for a good years to come. I have a good knowledge of the personnel in these bands at the time. There was none of them. It actually had, membership of the army had kind of faded out in the 60s, like early 60s. So by 1970, the band that stayed below the Ash Hall, none of them were army. There was a band then formed around the same time, and that wasn't army either, for the provost.
And so did they come out of the band, the ones that formed the other
No,
band?
they didn't actually. Most of them had gone out of the band, but there were older fellas who came back to the band, like, to get the band going again, like, and they were in civilians, you know. But they were old Republicans at the time, like, you know. They came back, and you had 2 bands then referring to themselves as the Cork Volunteers Pipe Band. There is a photograph there, I put it up as well, of their provisional band. They had no uniform, but you'll see on the big drum the word Shaladuk. That means provisional. So if you look at the photographs, you'll see that's the provisional band. And they did go to other things later, different ceremonies of burials and different
And I
things.
know they did bones town
And
provisionals and that.
they would go like, and they'd be in civilians, like, you know, and the other crowd then would have went with the officials. But I can tell you like that, for several long years before, after the by the 70s, like, the band were, if I to use the term, civilian to civilian, like, you know, and it kind of stayed there. Now, in the Provo band, there were some people who were formerly in the army. Jimmy and Seamus O'Linecan, he played with them as well, like, but he had been in prison, as I told you, the thing. But he was a strong supporter of that line within the Republican movement, supportive of the provisionals back in those times. Over the years then, from that on, you had people who would have attended, one or two former members of the band who would have attended odd commemorations or ceremonies where someone would be being buried or something like that. But the band was on the way out, and by the end of the century there was only a pretense that there was a band there. And the people who were in the Thomas Ash Hall, who were with the officials and then the Workers' Party, the people in the Workers' Party were finding it difficult to finance the use of the hall, and at some stage they decided to sell it. But then there was some deal done in the beginning that they'd still hold one room, and the band would have to share that with Sinn Féin, with the Workers' Party, and the fellas in the band just couldn't go with it. Like, it was only a small room, and band needs space. You have to practice and you have to do all these things, like, you know. And they didn't go with it, and they were told, well, you know what you can do. And they done it, they just moved away out of it, and they tried to exist for a while, and then they faded out. Now, like in late years, I saw a one only person out with the officials of the Workers' Party, and he'd to be done Cork Volunteers Pipe Band, but there was no band there. He was formerly. Whereas there'd be people now, Norman O'Rourke, was a person who probably played at most removals down through the years and Republican commemorations and things. But Norman just went there as Norman O'Rourke. He never bothered using the term former band member. But like, we still have some guys who play pipes. Someone told me there was a lad that was in our band one time, in Eddie Burke. He plays with some band in Dublin. I think just the 11th or 2, I'm not sure, no. I'm not sure. But Dennis Crowley, Dennis now would be, I think, 76. He plays with the Carrigaline band, still on the go, you know.
And he plays the pipes.
He plays the pipes still, great sign. But Norman O'Rourke, like, plays them regularly as well, still plays the pipes. There's another lad called Lynch, and he used to play with the Workers' Party, the grouping. And now I've heard him recently playing with the RSF or some crowd. But like, you know, as I said now, in fairness to some of those people, they were never in the army. And it was up to themselves who they played with, like, you know. But most of them had a great graw for the movement.
And
great graw for the movement, you know. So, as I say, Shinna will.